Hello, BookTube, and welcome to what is going to be the first of a number of live stream book reviews of entries into the Aubrey-Maturin series by Patrick O'Brien. And this week, what should I say, tonight, we're going to be reviewing the third book in the series called HMS Surprise, which was originally published in 1973. But let me just double check to make sure I actually got that correct. Yes, 1973. And the story, and I'm going to be joined today, as you can see on screen, by Iron Duke, who is a very big fan of the series and is in fact the reason why I'm reviewing HMS Surprise today. Thank you for coming on, Duke.
Oh, thanks for having me, Aaron. You quite often come on my stream, so I'm more than happy to come on yours. And Patrick O'Brien is definitely one of my favorite authors. And this is one of the best books in the, I think, 20-book Aubrey-Maturin series. Yeah,
it's 20 finished books, and then the final one is the unfinished voyage of Jack Aubrey, which I believe Patrick O'Brien died whilst writing.
Yeah, I've read that. It's quite sad because you don't get an ending, but I have read the unfinished voyage of Aubrey-Maturin.
Just before we carry on, I'm just going to say that to some people in the chat. Hello, Evelyn Sunglasses. Quite a lot of people watching this who watch Duke's channels will probably recognise quite a few of the names in the chat during the course of this live stream. Hello, DK. Hello, Commander. Hello, Woodpit. So we'll start just by going roughly over the plot of the book. So there will be spoilers for this book, though. So you might not want to watch this until you've read it. However, I should say it's a bit difficult to spoil a book that's been out since 1973, which makes it about the same age as my parents. So I'm not that overly concerned about spoiling it. So the plot begins.
Aaron, could I just say, look, I tell you, mate, I said this just before we went live. I've read this book 3 times, and I've also listened to an audio book version of it, and quite like last week in order to prepare for this stream, and I enjoyed the audio book version last week just as much as I enjoyed reading it as like a teenager in Britain when it first came out. So it won't really spoil it, I don't think.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So it's as you say, Duke, a wonderfully rich book. Which I've read this, for me, this is the second time I've read it, and it was as fresh as when I read it the first time. So I entirely agree with you. Now the plot of the book is. I'll give a simplified version just for brevity's sake. So the story begins in the Admiralty, where the Admiralty are deciding on whether the money, the prize money from an action, should be awarded to the captains of the Royal Navy ships took part, including Jack Aubrey. And the Admiralty, in their infinite wisdom, because the ships happen to be ships of countries that were neutral at the time, have subsequently become combatants in the war, they decide that the prize money should not be issued, and this puts Jack Aubrey into some difficulty. And also during the course of the this meeting at the Admiralty, Stephen Maturin, Aubrey's friend, who also happens to be an intelligence officer for the British, his name gets mentioned in this meeting, which is not only bad form on behalf of the minister, who says it, but also a breach of security. And so Maturin gets sent off to Spain to sort of deal with intelligence matters in the hope that the news won't get out too fast. And Aubrey is forced to wait on land for a new command. And the fact that he hasn't got the prize money has somewhat buggered up his personal life, because he was going to use that money to pay for his wedding to marry his love, Sophie.
Aaron,
Absolutely.
Aaron, it's worth mentioning, right, that the dirty politicians at the beginning of this
Yes.
book, and to get the full story, you have to watch the book before that, which is called Post Captain. What happens is that a British squadron is sent to intercept a Spanish squadron that is carrying loads and loads of gold from the New World to Spain to finance Spain's entry into the war on Napoleon's side. And the British ships, of course, defeat the Spanish ships and capture them. And there's millions and millions and millions in gold on these ships. So not only the captains, but all the officers and all the men are going to become fairly rich. But of course, the dirty politicians, and this, by the way, is based on an entirely true story. Like Patrick O'Brien always used to research his naval history quite deeply. And this is based on an entirely true story, and this is exactly what happened. These 4 Royal Navy frigates, who were smaller, actually they had smaller ships than the Spanish for the most part, but they still managed to defeat the Spanish because they were British Royal Navy guys, and that's what we always did in those days. And they captured all these ships with all these billions in doubloons on board, and all of the captains would have become like millionaires. The officers would have become extremely rich, and even the ordinary sailors would have had a hell of a lot of money. And the filthy politicians con it, basically, and won't give them the money.
Yeah. And it actually pointed out by Sir Joseph, who's the intelligence chief, and he's sort of making a case for Aubrey and the other captains. That this would have not only would this be unfair on the officers, it will have a bad effect on the men, because as you mentioned, they would get some of the money as well, and it's the sense of that they would give them bad morale.
The ordinary sailors, Aaron, would have got like, I don't know, probably 10 years pay in terms of money. You know, even the ordinary sailors would have been well off. And all this was taken away, and it was done in reality by a scummy government and scummy politicians. You know, politicians really weren't much better in those days than they are today.
Yeah, especially I think at that point it was I think Pitt was still Prime Minister, but he was out of office for a short period at that point. So it was the Whigs who were in charge, and they were good. And actually, that actually comes up because I've made a slight mistake there. When this decision is made in London, Jack Aubrey is actually on a ship blockading the French coast.
Yes, he is.
And the sort of politics here is made sort of interestingly describe the fact that Aubrey is a staunch Tory, but the captain of the ship he's presently looking after, is presently captaining, whilst that captain's away, is a Whig. And he runs it along sort of Whiggish lines, and so there's that very interesting sort of contrast in politics there. And so Aubrey is doing this blockade work, and you get some nice descriptions of sort of what is involved in the blockading of the French coast at the time, and the sort of element of boredom there is. The fact that they're having to wait for the French to do something, but they can't just sit there complacently, because of course the French could come out at any time. And so it's a very nice description of Aubrey keeping the sort of ship going and keeping the men's morale up, and sort of keeping the ship in proper working order for that, just in case it happens that the French ships happen to come out of the port. And I think that was really well described.
Yeah, they used to call it polishing Cape Circe, I think, where Aubrey particularly was, because I think he was watching too long. I think it was too long. The Royal Navy, you have an inshore squadron, which is frigates, and then the main British squadron stands a bit further off, and that's the ships of the line. And Aubrey, of course, is in charge of a frigate called HMS Lively, and he is, which was a real frigate, by the way, and he's part of the inshore squadron, and every day, twice a day, they go and look inside the harbour to see what the French are up to.
Yeah, and then you get a nice sense of also the ship, the fact that whilst Aubrey feels sort of slightly separated from them, partly because he's not the normal captain, it's not really his ship.
Yeah.
But also, at the same time, he actually likes them and they like him. There's definitely mutual respect on both sides.
Oh, Aubrey is a good captain.
Yeah.
So whilst the officers, the men are neither here nor there in this respect, but politically the officers are probably Whigs because the captain was a Whig.
Yeah.
But they respect Aubrey despite the fact he's a Tory because he's a good captain, and obviously that's good because that means your ship won't get destroyed if you have a good captain.
Yeah, and so Aubrey's obviously on this, is doing this blockade duty. Then the captain of the Lively returns, and so he takes the Lively back to Britain, and on the way we get a nice description of a couple of coastal raids, which when you read a lot of the naval fiction of the setting.
No, hang on there, Aaron. I don't think he takes it back to Britain.
Oh no, just take it to. Oh no, sorry, he takes it to Gibraltar.
He's supposed to take her to Gibraltar, but he doesn't end up going there because he has to pull in.
Oh yes, yeah. Sorry,
I think so.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yes, so he's meant to take it to Gibraltar, and you get to see at that point the nice descriptions of sort of coastal raiding, which in a lot of naval fiction isn't really portrayed very often. In most naval fiction of the setting this period, it's a lot of ships going against each other in broadsides, but for the Royal Navy, coastal raiding is very much a part and parcel of the naval warfare during the Planet War. So it's nice.
You knock out French coastal batteries and signal stations and anything else you could knock out that causes the French difficulties. Yeah.
And you get that nice description of them going in the harbour to get the French, that one French ship, and bringing it out, which is really well done. Which is recounted, interestingly, in a letter, him writing a letter back to Sophie. But then, of course, partway through, he doesn't give the full description because it's not something you would tell a woman.
Yes, there's a lot of blood and guts and stuff in it, and that's not what you tell your fiance when she's worried about your safety and all that kind of stuff. And she's a girl, so she doesn't need to know that stuff, But also, so Maturin, as you rightly said, Aaron, is a British intelligence agent, and he's gone back to Spain to do like spy stuff, basically. And I believe I'm right in saying that Aubrey's ship is met by a Spanish boat, a Catalan boat particularly, because Maturin is supposed to be half Irish and half Catalan. And these Catalan nationalist guys come aboard and say that basically Stephen Maturin, who is Jack Aubrey's mate, basically, he's a surgeon. Stephen Maturin is a surgeon. He's a natural philosopher, which is to say he's a naturalist. He loves studying like animals and stuff like this. But he's also a British intelligence agent, and the French have captured him and are torturing him because the French Napoleonic French revolutionary bastards who used to do that sort of thing quite regularly in reality. And so Jack Aubrey is told that his mate, Stephen Maturin, his best friend, is held by the French Secret Service in Port Mahon, which is in Menorca, which Jack Aubrey knows because it used to be British run and we'd given it back to the French during the Peace of Amiens in 1802. and he's told his mate is there and he's being held and being tortured. Sorry, Aaron.
No, I was actually going to go on to that, and of course, because of that, Aubrey goes to save him and does successfully, and we get to see again another sort of raid done by the Royal Navy. In this case, Aubrey with members of the Lively's crew, and they are successfully able to get Maturin out. And one thing, Duke mentioning the sort of torture and the sort of French Revolution, one thing that this book does do, in a very small way, but it's nice to see it, is making the fact that there is a continuation between French Revolutionary France and Napoleonic France. Napoleon Bonaparte very much saw himself as the continuation of the French Revolution in its quote unquote best form, and it's nice. It's a nice thing that O'Brien does there. He brings up that in small ways that continuity between the sort of Jacobinism of the Reign of Terror and Robespierre through to the sort of police state of Bonaparte at that point.
Yeah, 100%. Like Napoleon said, "I am the revolution."
Yeah.
And in many ways, he was. I mean, you see people supposedly on the right today all try and pretend Napoleon was some good kind of, conservative dude, and he wasn't. I'm sorry, he never was.
No.
Like, remember the so-called whiff of grape shot, which was actually like mowing down loads of royalist French civilians with grape shot from cannon. That was Napoleon.
Yeah. And just to go on a slight tangent, it is interesting that the British response to the French Revolution and Napoleonic France is started by an Anglo-Irishman, Edmund Burke, and ended by the Duke of Wellington, who is, of course, Duke's profile picture. Both of whom were firmly opposed to the French Revolution and, in Burke's case, predicted Napoleon would come to power. It's interesting.
Yeah. Very fair. Very fair. So then we switch to England.
Yes.
And we switch to Maturin, who has been terribly wounded by the French torture. And he goes to Bath to take the waters, which is quite common in those days. The warm water was considered to be healthy for you and what have you, and the sulphurous water, I believe it is. Been to Bath quite a few times. Lovely town, or used to be anyway. Well worth visiting if you ever go to England. So Maturin goes there, and Maturin is the doctor and the friend of Sophie. And Sophie is the great love of Jack Aubrey's life, who he desperately wants to marry. Unfortunately, she has a really nasty mother.
Yes.
She is a vile woman. She has a very small intellect, and she worships capital. She worships people who have money, and she doesn't want her daughter to marry the gallant Captain Aubrey, who is probably one of the bravest men you could possibly marry, and who absolutely thinks the sun shines out of the rear end of this daughter, Sophie. She wants her to marry someone who doesn't give a shit about her, but who is rich.
Yes.
I think that's the quick way of describing it.
Yeah, she's a proper battle axe as well. And,
absolutely. She's like the mother-in-law of your nightmares.
Yeah.
Basically.
That's one of the reasons why I do want to keep reading these books now, purely because I want to see how her sort of reaction to their future romance.
And Aubrey and Sophie is this beautiful blonde girl who's actually fairly innocent because she's a typical middle-class girl of that era, or upper middle-class girl of that era. But also she's deeply in love with Jack, and Jack's deeply in love with her. And it's an ongoing thing for all these books. And this is like the beginning of the start of it. And of course, Jack thought he was going to be rich from capturing the Spanish frigates, a great risk of his life. But the government cheated him out of that. Although he does end up getting about £9,000.
Yeah.
which are like is an ex gratia payment. But at this time, Jack owes over £11,000. He's got debts.
Yeah.
So it almost covers his debts, but no more than that. So Sophie's mother is able to say, no, you can't possibly marry him, blah, blah, blah. So then we get Stephen Maturin in Bath trying to make himself better, talking to Sophie, etc. And I think in the end, they get a midnight meeting somewhere before Jack goes to sea again. But
yes.
It's Stephen Maturin who is able to persuade the British Chief of Intelligence to give Jack Aubrey a ship and a job that's going to take him overseas. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what happens, Aaron, yeah?
Yeah. And one of the nice things in this bit is that Sophie, this bit I'm going to describe, so shows Sophie's both good nature as well as the fact that she doesn't quite understand Jack Aubrey, and the fact that during their meetings, Sophie asks Maturin to explain to her what's going on in the war because she doesn't quite understand what's going on, and she doesn't want.
Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Which, knowing Jack Aubrey's character, he wouldn't care either way whether she understood the war or not. But the fact that she wants to understand it shows how much she loves him, and also how it really does show how much of a good person she is.
Yes, she's trying to find out about the two Sicilies and various obscure principalities during the Napoleonic Wars. Very, very, very true. But anyway, Jack is because of Stephen Maturin, really, because Stephen Maturin's quite an important British intelligence agent. He's given this beautiful little frigate called HMS Surprise. And HMS Surprise was captured off the French. Again, she was a real warship. And she was a little frigate. She was only 28 guns. Whereas in the Napoleonic Wars, most frigates were 36 guns. And big frigates could have anywhere between 44 and 52 guns. So she was a little frigate. She was fairly old. She was originally French, which made her fast. The French built fast ships. But she wasn't immensely powerful. But Jack had served on her before as a midshipman. So he's in love with this little frigate, who is a beautiful little ship and extremely brave. And he's very, very pleased. And he's given this mission basically to go to the far side of the world. He has to go to Kampong, which is in Southeast Asia. And in those days, that meant you went down through the Atlantic, called somewhere in South America, and then went around the Cape. Because although the British had captured the Cape before 1802, we gave it back to the Dutch and had to capture it again. And we hadn't at this stage recaptured it. So Jack Aubrey's got to go on this enormously long voyage.
Yeah, it's a nice this voyage very much takes up a significant part of the book, and it's nice because you both get to see the sort of day-to-day sort of life for a Royal Navy ship on such a journey, and also you get some nice small characters that are in there, like the Aubrey's steward Killick, who is continually bad-tempered and making it clear that he doesn't think much of Aubrey being late for things and constantly sort of grumbling about the coffee being cold, even though it's not. There's nice sort of humour in the throughout Patrick O'Brien's books. There are.
Yeah, he bullies. He tries to bully Aubrey on occasion, and to some degree does sometimes.
Yeah. One of my favourite funny parts of this book is the description of the cook, who has two wooden legs, one in replace of one of his other leg, with a missing leg, and the second leg is on his backside to stop him going into his cooking during if the ship moves suddenly. And that didn't make me laugh out loud when I heard that, because because you can see it.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And then I think the next important thing is scurvy breaks out on Aubrey's ship because they lose the wind. And of course, with a sailing ship with no engine, if you lose the wind, you don't go anywhere. And so they're at sea much longer than they were hoping to be. And scurvy breaks out. And so Maturin, who is the ship surgeon, goes to Aubrey and says, well, look, we've got to pull into Brazil somewhere in order that I can get fruits with vitamin C and this kind of stuff. Now, Aubrey also knows, though, that because Stephen Maturin is this mad keen naturalist, he's also probably going to try and find some vampire bats because, that's the sort of thing that Stephen Maturin is into. And so he says to him, yeah, okay, we will eventually. He says, we're going to go ashore and you can go and get your fruits, but no vampires on the ship. Aaron, I've got to disappear for like 2 minutes. I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. I will just say at this point, when they come back at board after they've gone for supplies on somewhere in Brazil, Maturin comes back and he has kept his promise. He has not come back with a vampire bat. He comes back with a sloth instead. And it becomes sort of the ship's mascot. And during the later course of the journey, it doesn't initially seem to particularly like Jack Aubrey for some reason, which somewhat saddens Jack Aubrey because he's somebody who likes to be liked. And eventually he does get on with this sloth by feeding it rum, which when Maturin finds out, he's not best pleased. Just whilst Duke's way, I'll just bring up a couple of comments. I like the description of decline in the opening. Yes, that was very good. Funny bit, he's on our side, given he's a bit funny. He's on our side, given his more liberal worldview and he's of Irish stock. Film somewhat alluded to this in the argument over men. With the argument that men must be governed. Quote, yes, yeah, it is interesting that he is. You could argue that Maturin is a sort of Whig who has been robbed by reality. That he is in the book. It's mentioned the fact that he was a supporter of the United Irishmen, which is an Irish revolutionary organisation, mostly consisting of, in its leadership at least, of a Protestant ascendancy. People instead of sort of Irish Catholic people. But Maturin does not go along with them when they get to rise up in 1798 under Wolfe Tone. And then he's sympathetic to the French Revolution, I believe, in the early 1790s. But then when the Reign of Terror happens, he's very much against that. And so it's, as Mitch says, it's a strange thing that he's a British agent given his sort of previous political beliefs.
But he hates the violence, Aaron. That's why he doesn't support Wolfe Tone, is because of the violence. He supports the intellectual idea of like Ireland having its own parliament, but he doesn't support like killing people over it.
Yeah,
and that's the same reason why he initially is a fan of the French Revolution, but as soon as they start chopping like women's heads off and this kind of stuff, which they very quickly did, and like drowning people in barges in rivers, he realizes that they're evil and doesn't like them.
Yeah.
I think that's the fairest way to understand it. He's intellectually liberal, but not in practical terms, because he doesn't actually like killing people for no good reason.
Yeah, he's liberal-minded, but he's definitely not a radical, shall we say?
Yes, I think that's the fair way to say it. So anyway, Maturin comes back with all these citrus fruits and all the rest of it to cure the crew of scurvy, which those things will do fairly quickly. And he also has this animal, that he's bringing aboard, which Jack Aubrey assumes is a vampire, because Jack Aubrey is not a naturalist and doesn't know what a vampire is. In fact, they're bats, but it's a sloth. So I think it was, I can't remember if it was a two-toed or a three-toed sloth, but it's a sloth.
Yeah.
And the sloth doesn't like Aubrey. And Aubrey likes most people, really, the captain of the ship. And he especially likes dogs and horses. So he also assumes there's no reason why sloths wouldn't like him too. So Aubrey tries his best to become friends with the sloth. And eventually he gives the sloth some biscuit soaked in rum. And at this point, the sloth starts to like him. and without doing too many spoilers, eventually there's a confrontation between Captain Jack Aubrey and the surgeon Stephen Maturin. And the surgeon Stephen Maturin says, "Aubrey, you have debauched my sloth," which is extremely funny. But
yeah. Again, it's all this sort of part of the book has sort of lovely, wonderful sort of episodes like that throughout it.
There's loads of stuff like that. Yeah,
and we should just say that the reason they're going to Kampong is to drop off a diplomat.
We'll get there.
Yeah, he's a very much a nice character himself, though.
He's nice, but entirely ineffectual, Aaron.
Yes.
But he's a nice guy. He is, but he's entirely ineffectual. But he's there to be the character that he's there as.
Yeah.
And so anyway, eventually, I believe Maturin drops this sloth off with some sort of religious group in South America.
Yeah.
And the last thing you hear about him is that he occasionally pinches the communal wine. So anyway. So then they go on this long South Atlantic voyage to pick up the roaring 40s down right near the Antarctica, to get around South Africa and into the Indian Ocean. And they face these enormous storms, like really huge, with 50 and 60 foot waves and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and that is nicely described in the book. So that real sort of contrast they have between when you've that bit where they're going to South America, they've got real sort of baking heat they're dealing with, and then they go south, and they're that close to the south, sort of the Antarctic, that they're actually having to wear thick coats to stay warm, and dealing with real sort of drop in temperatures.
Also, the other thing that's happening in this book, one of the main lower deck characters in the book is someone called Barrett Bondon. And in the movie, he's played by this guy who doesn't look anything like what he's supposed to look like. Barrett Bondon is supposed to be the heavyweight champion of the Royal Navy. But anyway, not the guy who plays him in the movie Master and Commander at all. But Barrett is also supposed to be a pretty intelligent dude, and Stephen Maturin, who Barrett Bondon can already read a bit, but Stephen Maturin teaches him to write during this book.
Yeah, and there's a first teacher composing poetry as well at the same time.
Yes.
And now there is a bit now where I've forgotten that you brought it up, Duke, earlier before we started. The bit where they're on they're on the rock with the birds that Maturin goes to look at.
Oh yeah.
And the mate, you got the officer with him who's having quite some difficulties in his marriage, and you get sort of a nice scene with that officer sort of confessing that to Maturin, who becomes sort of uncomfortable with the fact. and then a storm comes over, and Maturin is forced to survive on his own for quite some time because a couple of hours, because this storm washes away, and we don't actually, it's never stated, but it's almost certain that this officer is then killed.
Yes,
Yeah.
he is killed. He is. And Maturin is stuck on this island for like 2 or 3 days and barely survives because he's got no water. But yeah, absolutely. But then they go through this vast South Atlantic storm. Eventually, they arrive in India.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way India is described, because of course this is India still under the East India Company, and it's so very much pre-Raj, and it's you get a nice sort of snapshot of I believe it's Bombay they're at, and you get a nice snapshot of India at that time. The fact there was a lot less, there wasn't as much stratification between the British and everybody else that you did then get with the Raj, and so it's
up to a point. That's true. I think it's also worth mentioning, Aaron, that the love of Stephen Maturin's life, who is a bit of a bitch, let's be honest, a bit of a bitch and a bit of a slag. She has gone to India with this rich Jewish guy who has been made commissioner of the former French colonies that the Brits had like taken over in Eastern India. And she went there with him. And Stephen Maturin's whole deal about going on this voyage is because he's deeply in love with this slut. And all through all of the novels he is. And he's thinking, I'm going to go and see this Diana chick, who he wanted to marry, but who went off with this much richer Jewish dude, and he's Jewish, I'm sure he is. Yes, he is.
He is.
Yeah. But anyway, she goes off with this dude, and so that's also part of the story. When Stephen Maturin arrives in India, he meets this little girl of about 9 or 10, and she takes him all over the place. And all the Indian kids want these little silver bangles. So eventually Maturin buys her like the best silver bangles he can, and she gets killed. And she gets killed so people can get these silver bangles. Yeah, that's what kills her. So of course Stephen isn't too happy about this. Yeah,
and we should say whilst that's going on, Jack Aubrey has had essentially having the Surprise completely
largely rebuilt in a good dockyard.
Yeah, and most of his crew is essentially not allowed to. When I say go ashore, I mean they're not allowed to go pretty much beyond the docks.
Well, they're not allowed to do that for like about 2 or 3 weeks. So eventually they are, but they've got to finish refitting the ship first.
Yeah,
which is pretty standard naval stuff, to be honest. You refit your ship, then you get some leave, you know.
Yeah, and by doing this, when they do eventually go back out to sea, the Surprise goes faster than she ever did before, and is sort of despite how old she is as a ship, she's at this almost at the peak of her performance because of all we do.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing you have to mention that we haven't so far is there is a French squadron in the Indian Ocean. Like the French have sent a fairly powerful squadron there with a 74-gun ship. And Aubrey's little 28-gun frigate ain't going to survive against that. But because Aubrey manages to repair Surprise, and she's as good as she can be, she can exchange a few shots with them and then piss off and outrun them. Yeah.
And in fact, when Aubrey finds out that Diana is in Bombay, he sort of he sets out an order saying we're going to leave as soon as possible and sort of tries to stop Maturin from seeing her because he obviously is his good friend and he doesn't want him to get involved with her again. But unfortunately, before that, Maturin does actually meet her. And
well, also you've also got to understand another thing, that this is why these books are so good, Aaron, is that at one stage Aubrey was also the lover of Diana, and like in a previous one of the previous two books, Aubrey was also her lover for a little while, and then he backed off because A, he realized Stephen Maturin liked her, and B, he fell in love with Sophie. So
yeah, and so eventually, members of the surprise crew are can't remember which officer it is. One of the officers finds him, and then takes him back after the funeral of the little girl to the surprise, and then they set sail again for Kampong, and as they oh, sorry, Jake.
No, you carry on, man.
And during this course of this, the British diplomat, who's nice but ineffectual, unfortunately dies before they reach Kampong, and so he's buried on an island. And at this point, one thing I should have mentioned is that the Maturin asks Diana to marry him, and she says, "When you come back to Calcutta, I'll give you an answer." And so when this diplomat dies and they bury him on a small island off the coast of what is now Indonesia, one of the islands of Indonesia. Yes. And then they go back to Calcutta, but on the way they have their first, I think, is it at this point they have their first interaction with the China fleet returning back to Britain. I can't remember if
it's the East India Company, China fleet, which and East Indiamen were big, fairly powerful, not badly armed merchantmen, but they weren't warships. They didn't have as many crew, didn't have as many guns, and the guns they did have were much smaller.
Yeah, and that's one thing that Aubrey does comment on, especially the sort of the leader, the captain who's in charge of the China fleet. He is described as in fact I still remember he's ex-Royal Navy himself.
Yeah, the Commodore. Yeah, the Commodore. By the way, again, Aaron, this was a real battle that really took place, and it was in fact the ex-Royal Navy Commodore who did fight off the French by bluffing them.
Yeah, and we do get that scene where we get a nice battle scene where they actually say they bluff through this. Aubrey in the book, Aubrey's the one who comes up with the idea, and they do bluff this French force.
Admiral.
Actually, Admiral. I forgot his name now. He's previously appeared in the books as well, and having captured Aubrey and also Maturin, and so you've got a sense of them having respect for this French admiral, but really definitely not wanting to be captured again. That they are determined to get the better of him this time, and they do quite successfully. And so they carry on after this to Calcutta, where they are feted for their actions, the surprise. And at this point, Aubrey.
Hang on, Aaron. Aubrey is given a very rich thing to take back to the UK. And when Royal Navy captains transported something that was worth a load of money, like money, jewels, you name it, the captain and also the officers and crew earned money when they got back to the UK if they did so successfully. Yeah,
and this is actually presented to Aubrey by Canning, who's Diana's lover, and
the Jewish lover guy. Yes.
And interestingly, in the book, he is at least to my reading, he's portrayed as not being a particularly bad person. He's a decent bloke. She's very much a bitch, as a
that's totally fair, and he's described as an okay dude. It's Diana who is a bitch, absolutely, yeah, and she is.
Yeah, and so they are fated. So Jack Aubrey and the crew of the Surprise are fated in Calcutta, and Diana does not give her word to does not essentially respond to Maturin's proposal. We should say, one thing I think we've both I've just remembered is that between the fight with the French and returning to Calcutta and arriving at Calcutta, Maturin had fallen ill, and so he's in a very weak state. And
no, I don't think that's right, Aaron. I think he arrives back in. They arrive back in Calcutta.
Yeah.
Canning says HMS Surprise can take this big treasure home to Britain, which is going to make Aubrey and all the officers and men quite a lot of money. But he gets in a row with Maturin.
Yes,
because he knows that Maturin loves Diana, and he hits him.
Yes,
he hits Maturin, and of course Maturin, like any early 19th century man, if someone hits you who is your own rank, you say, "Well, I challenge you to a duel, sir."
Yeah.
Let's push this out in blood then. And Aubrey, Maturin is actually a pretty deadly guy for the most part.
Yeah, and that's right, isn't it? Because he becomes ill after fighting the duel because Canning gets him, though he doesn't.
He shoots him. He doesn't kill him, but he shoots him.
Yeah, and then they go from Calcutta.
And Maturin kills the other guy.
Yeah, and then it's after that they go at the back at sea, and that's when Maturin is ill. And I think it's but I got kind of slightly confused because I think they then when they leave Calcutta they put in again at Bombay again, which is where Diana meets them. And that's where she doesn't give Maturin. Well, I think
she gives him back his ring. She gives Maturin back the ring that he wants to marry her with, and pisses off to America with a rich American.
Yes. Yeah. And
in other words, Diana is a whore, and I don't know. I've known at least 3 or 4 Dianas in my life, but then I always make bad choices with women, or almost always anyway. But so
luckily I've not met any, but I doubt I'll get away throughout my life.
You won't go away with your whole life, mate. I guarantee you won't. But whatever.
Yeah. So at that point, after Bombay, they sailed back around into the Atlantic. And they meet it's
Madeira.
Yeah, Madeira, because between I think in Calcutta, Jack writes, which is in Calcutta or Bombay, Jack writes to Sophie to tell her to come on a ship, to contact one of his friends who's a Royal Navy captain to bring her to Madeira. And they get to Madeira, she's not there, but then subsequently discovers that the ships are quite close with her on, and there is a reunion between Jack and Sophie, and which is extremely well done and does show how much they love each other. Which obviously had hints, we've had very, very clear views of throughout the book. That's the first time, other than that meeting in the early hours of the morning before Maturin and Aubrey leave, that you get to see them together and happy. And it's obviously Jack has the news that he now has the money to marry her, which is very much something that, as we've been explained through the book, during this sort of hung over the book between Jack and Sophie.
I think Dissident Knight is saying in the chat, was the tidbit about swabbing the deck true? Dissident Knight, I don't know which bit you're talking about, mate. You'd have to tell me.
Oh, I think that's the one. You know where Maturin is sleeping on the deck, and they're scrubbing it for the Sunday service.
Oh, around it.
Yeah,
they're scrubbing around him, and he puts tar all over the deck. Yeah, I could well believe that, because the Royal Navy would not have dirty decks. I mean,
no.
so yeah. But yeah, no, that's probably true, Dissident Knight. I would say two things about these books, Aaron, which are really good. One is that because Stephen Maturin is a complete landlubber, he enables the books to describe loads of naval stuff that if you weren't a naval guy, you wouldn't understand. Because the sailors, whether they be officers or just ordinary sailors, often describe to Maturin what they're talking about. So that's really useful, because if you're a landlubber, and even if you've gone to sea, like I have, but you don't know about like early 19th century sailing ships, this is a perfect way to describe that, because Maturin doesn't understand any of this. So that's a good thing about these books. And the other good thing about these books, I think, is that Sophie Aubrey and Diana, whatever her name is, are like the two opposites of the women you will meet in your life. They like, you'll meet some who are like one and some who are like the other, and some are a bit like both of them, to be honest. But you know, it's part of why Patrick O'Brian was such a brilliant author. And there were some literary figures in Britain in the end of the last century who suggested, and of course it never happened because the British literary scene is so lefty, it's unbelievable. But there were literary figures in the late 20th century who suggested that occasionally someone like Patrick O'Brian should win the Booker Prize.
Yeah.
And of course it never happened because, like I said, those guys are just so lefty.
Yeah, the British literary establishment is, people put it this way, all the sort of claims about clannishness and sort of exclusionary nature of the quote-unquote British establishment in the 1950s, which wasn't true of that then. It's absolutely true of the British literary establishment, both at the time of Patrick O'Brien's, that Duke is mentioning, suggesting he should win the Booker, and since then. They have not changed one iota.
100%, man. Yes, 100%. All I would say at this point, because we're coming up to your hour, is if you read one series of books in your life, read Patrick O'Brien's Aubrey-Maturin saga. It's really one gigantic book. Like all of them, from Master and Commander to Jack Aubrey's Unfinished Voyage, 21 novels. They're really one enormous continuous story, and they're brilliant. They're just brilliant. The characters are brilliant. There are bits in them that I don't totally like, but for the most part, they're just brilliant. Really, really. Like I said, I've read all of them at least twice. All of them. Yeah,
and you mentioned it before we started, Duke, that many people say that to start the series, HMS Surprise is a good beginning, and I would agree with that, because it gives you a good sense of the characters and also the time period and sort of what's happening in the Royal Navy at that period. And so it's a really enjoyable book, and I can recommend it.
Nearly all of the naval actions in the book are based on real Royal Navy actions. Like I think there's hardly any of them that are made up by Patrick O'Brian. They're nearly all real. Sometimes he changes things, but in general, they're real actions. Jack Aubrey is like a one of the most likable characters you'll ever meet. I mean, as Aaron was saying earlier, he's a Tory guy, but he's a Tory guy who likes most people, who tries to treat people fairly, and who likes all dogs and horses, and will occasionally like debauch or sloth. But he's generally a nice guy.
Yeah, he's a really engaging character. And obviously, the sort of the heart of the books is his relationship with Maturin, and
they're best mates. These two they're not like each other at all, but they're best mates, and they will each die for each other if necessary.
Yeah, which of course you see when Aubrey goes to get Maturin at the start of the book. That's a very example of it.
100%.
Now I'll just go through a couple more of the comments. This is referring to sort of the stuff of having to wait at when they go into Brazil. In the book, it's more a matter of the fact that they have
the wind stops and they're at sea longer than they expect to be.
Yeah, but I would imagine. It depends on where they would be. In the actual Royal Navy at sea. I would imagine in some areas they would have difficulties, but it would depend what's going on. I think this is about meeting Dianas in real life. Yeah.
Known a few of those, I'm sad to say. But, yeah.
Oh, also, he wants to know if there's the suspicion about men of rank getting wet from scrubbing the deck.
Well, absolutely. That was a Royal Navy suspicion big time. Like, no one in the Royal Navy who was senior could get wet. So, the captain couldn't come on deck until it had been swabbed and dried.
And that's one thing we should mention about Jack Aubrey's character, that he very much is a man, very much holds to the sort of sailor superstitions throughout the book. And that's one of the
He does. And he's also a guy who will promote good ordinary sailors if he can.
Yeah.
Although he's a Tory, he's not an idiot. He wants the best sailors on his ship, and he wants the best officers on his ship. And if one of them doesn't come from a really good family, he doesn't care, so long as they're competent.
Yeah, you get that with the is it the purser on the ship, the one who get during the confrontation with the French admiral, he gets sent over to one of the East Indiamen, and he's the purser of the Surprise. It's because of money, I think, that he can't afford to join.
He has a club foot. Yes. Aaron. That's why he couldn't be a lieutenant. He has a club foot, so he bought himself a purser's commission because he wanted to go to sea. But he fought at the glorious 1st of June and stuff like this. Yeah. So he was a real sailor.
Yeah.
But if you look at people like Pullings, for example, Pullings rises through the ranks as a master's mate. And at one stage, I don't think it's in this book, but in one of the later books, Jack Aubrey wants to promote Barrett Bondon to master's mate. And Barrett Bondon himself doesn't want to be promoted. He wants to stay where he is because he just doesn't want to do that.
Yeah, and there's the other cat, the lieutenant who joins us, who as soon as they get to Bombay, and Jack Aubrey knows this is going to happen because he's going
to get promoted. He's going to be given his own ship, master and commander. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's it. You get, as we said at the start, you get a lot of really nice, rich detail about the period, not just about the Royal Navy, but almost pretty much about sort of Britain in this period, and
even the language, Aaron. Like if I was somebody like Mitch, right, and I know Mitch is really into languages and English and all the rest of it. The great thing about about Patrick O'Brien's books is he uses authentic early 19th century English. They don't sound like modern Englishmen at all, because we didn't speak in quite the same way then. as we do now.
Yeah. And it's,
But yeah, they're brilliant books, and I can't recommend them enough. They're so good. If you want to read a series about early 19th century Britain or Nelson's Navy or both, read the Patrick O'Brien or Aubrey-Maturin books. They're brilliant. They really are.
Yeah, and actually, if you're interested to know a bit more about sort of Nelson's Navy and then the Royal Navy during the Napoleonic and French Revolutionary Wars, Duke did a live stream this last Wednesday on just that, and so it's a
Nelson's Navy, and you were a guest.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So with that, we're going to bring things to an end now. But I will say that I intend this month to read The Mauritius Command, and so hopefully we can have a live stream about that either at the end of this month or the beginning of next month, depending when I've read it.
Look forward to it, mate. Look forward to it. I'll happily do any Patrick O'Brien books you want to do.
Oh, just bear a second. Oh, hello, Guy. Guy is a self-published author that I've interviewed on the channel. There's a great book called Frigates, which describes some battles. Oh, okay.
Cool. Excellent.
Okay, so I should say, Guy, that we're about to finish if you've arrived late. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will say goodbye. Oh, thanks, Guy. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will say goodbye, and I will see you at some point this week. And more than likely, the next time I'll be on a live stream will probably be Duke's live stream on Wednesday. So,
well, hopefully, Aaron will stick that in the description somewhere, so
yes,
you can find it.
So, okay, well, that, ladies and gentlemen, night, DK. So with that,
go well, guys. Go well.